The gunshot echoed across the valley as Daisy Fitzgerald rode into Telluride, Colorado, her heart pounding as fiercely as her horse's hooves against the dusty trail. It was 1878, and she was running from everything she'd ever known and everyone who'd ever known her. The towering peaks of the San Juan Mountains stood like silent sentinels as she approached the mining town, her reputation following close behind like a shadow at dusk. The main street of Telluride bustled with the usual activity of a prosperous mining settlement. Men in dusty work clothes mingled with merchants, and a few proper ladies who kept their distance from the saloon at the far end of town. Daisy pulled her horse to a stop outside the general store, her fingers nervously adjusting the brim of her hat to better hide her face. She was 24, but the last year had aged her spirit considerably. "You need help there, madam." The voice belonged to a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face. His eyes were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin. Daisy kept her gaze low, just passing through. Not many folks just pass through Telluride, end of the line for most. He extended a calloused hand. "Preston Irwin, I run the livery at the edge of town." She hesitated before taking his hand. "Daisy, just Daisy." Preston's eyes narrowed slightly at her reluctance to provide a surname, but he didn't press the matter. "Well, just Daisy, your horse looks like it could use some rest and care. I'd be happy to tend to it while you get yourself situated." Before Daisy could respond, a voice called out from behind them. "Preston, get over here and help with this delivery." He tipped his hat to her. "That'd be Mr. Jenkins from the Mercantile. Think about my offer. Livery's just down the way, can't miss it." Daisy watched him walk away, noticing the easy confidence in his stride and the gun strapped to his hip, not worn low like a gunslinger, but practically like a man who knew how to use it if necessary. She led her horse toward the small hotel on the corner, aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. The hotel clerk looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from boredom to interest. "Room for the night, maybe longer," Daisy replied, placing a few coins on the counter. "Depends on what opportunities I find here. Name?" he asked, pulling the registry toward her. She hesitated only a moment. "Daisy Fitzgerald." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Any relation to the Fitzgeralds from Denver?" "No," she answered quickly. "No relation to anyone." After settling into her small room, Daisy sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to exhale fully for the first time in days. She opened her satchel and counted her remaining money. It wouldn't last long, not even in a place like Telluride. She needed work, and she needed it soon. The next morning, Daisy found herself at the livery stable, looking for the man she'd met yesterday. Preston Irwin was shoeing a horse, his strong arms working efficiently as sweat dampened his shirt. "Mr. Irwin," she called. He looked up, surprise and then recognition crossing his face. "Miss Just Daisy," he said with a slight smile. "Come to take me up on my offer about your horse. Actually, I was wondering if you know of any work for a woman in this town. I can cook, clean, so I'm not afraid of hard work." Preston studied her for a moment. She didn't look like a woman accustomed to domestic service, despite her claims. There was something in her bearing, in the way she held herself, that suggested a different sort of upbringing. Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house might need help. Her last girl left to get married last month. He paused. "Though I should warn you, she's particular about who she hires. Particular how? She likes to know where people come from, who their people are." His eyes met hers directly. "Things you seem reluctant to share." Daisy stiffened. "My past is my business, Mr. Irwin." "Indeed it is." Preston returned to his work. "But in a town this size, secrets have a way of becoming everyone's business eventually." Despite Preston's warning, Daisy made her way to the boarding house that afternoon. Mrs. Sullivan was a stern-faced woman with gray, streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She listened to Daisy's request for employment with narrowed eyes. "References?" she asked curtly. "I don't have any written ones with me," Daisy admitted. "Previous employers," Daisy swallowed. "I worked for a family in Denver, the Hendersons." Mrs. Sullivan's expression made it clear she doubted this claim. "And why did you leave their employment?" "Personal reasons," Daisy replied, her voice tight. Mrs. Sullivan's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't hire women with personal reasons, Miss Fitzgerald. Good day to you. The door shut firmly in Daisy's face, leaving her standing on the porch with her cheeks burning. She turned to find Preston leaning against a post across the street, watching her with an unreadable expression. I told you she was particular, he said as she approached. You make a habit of following women around town, Mr. Irwin, Daisy snapped, embarrassment making her tone sharper than intended. Preston straightened. I was on my way to the telegraph office. This happens to be the most direct route. His expression softened slightly. No luck with Mrs. Sullivan, I take it, Daisy sighed. None at all. The Silverton Bell Saloon is hiring serving girls, he offered, then quickly added when he saw her expression, just for serving drinks and food, nothing more. The owner, Eddie Malone, runs a decent establishment. I'll consider it, Daisy said, though the thought of working in a saloon made her stomach tighten. In her experience, serving girls rarely remain just serving girls for long. Or, Preston continued, I could use some help at the livery. My assistant left for the silver mines last month, thinking he'd make his fortune. I've been managing alone, but with spring coming, I'll have more horses than I can handle. Daisy raised an eyebrow. You'd hire a woman to work in a stable. I'd hire someone who needs work and isn't afraid of it, Preston countered. Besides, you look like you know your way around horses. I do, she admitted. My father. She trailed off, catching herself before revealing too much. Your father taught you, Preston finished for her. Nothing wrong with that. Pays not much, but there's a small room in the back of the stable you could use if you wanted to save on hotel costs. Daisy considered his offer. Working with horses would be preferable to serving drinks to miners and cowboys, and living in the stable would stretch her meager funds. Still, she hesitated. Why would you offer a job to someone you know nothing about? Preston's blue eyes held hers steadily. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, Miss Fitzgerald, even those with secrets. The way he said her surname made it clear he'd been making inquiries. Daisy felt a flutter of panic. What have you heard about me? She demanded. Nothing yet, Preston replied honestly. But I reckon if I keep my ears open, I might. Small towns and telegraph wires make for quick news. Daisy took a deep breath. If I accept your offer, I expect discretion, Mr. Irwin. A slow smile spread across his face. I'm known for many things in Telluride, but gossip isn't one of them. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Daisy took his hand, noting the warmth and strength in his grip. We do. That evening, Daisy moved her few possessions into the small room at the back of the livery stable. It was clean, if sparse, a narrow bed, a small table with a basin, a hook on the wall for clothes, and a tiny window that looked out toward the mountains. Preston had been apologetic about the accommodations, but to Daisy, it represented something she hadn't had in months: safety. The next few weeks established a routine. Daisy rose early to help feed and water the horses before the day's customers arrived. She discovered that Preston had a thriving business, not only boarding horses but breeding and training them as well. His reputation as the best horseman in the county drew clients from as far as Denver and Santa Fe. What surprised Daisy most was Preston's patience with both horses and humans. She watched him work with a particularly difficult stallion, his voice never rising above a calm, steady tone, even when the animal reared and fought against the lead rope. The trick is to let them know you're not afraid, but you're not their enemy either, he explained one afternoon as he finally got the horse to accept a saddle without bucking. Most wild things just need to understand you mean them no harm. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Daisy. Preston had never again asked about her past, though she occasionally caught him watching her with curious eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. As April turned to May, Telluride bloomed with wildflowers, and the snowmelt from the mountains fed rushing streams through the valleys. Business at the livery increased as miners returned after the harsh winter, and ranchers came to town for supplies. It was during one such busy day that trouble arrived in the form of a well-dressed man who entered the stable while Preston was away delivering a horse to a ranch outside town. "Can I help you?" Daisy asked, looking up from where she was cleaning tack. The man removed his hat, revealing slicked-back dark hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. "I'm looking for the owner. Mr. Irwin is out at the moment. He should return by late afternoon if you'd like to come back." The man's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her. "And you are his assistant," Daisy replied, deliberately omitting her name. "I see." He replaced his hat. "When he returns, please inform him that Mr. Lawrence Bishop would like to discuss purchasing one of his Morgan horses." "I'm staying at the hotel." Daisy nodded, relieved that he was leaving, but the man paused at the door. "You look familiar," he said suddenly. "Have we met before, perhaps in Denver?" Daisy's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't believe so, sir." "I've never been to Denver." He studied her for a moment longer before nodding and departing. As soon as he was gone, Daisy sank onto a hay bale, her legs suddenly weak. Lawrence Bishop was a business associate of her former husband, a man who would certainly recognize her if he got a proper look at her face. When Preston returned that evening, she told him about the visitor but omitted her concerns about being recognized. "Bishop, you say?" Preston frowned. "Name doesn't ring a bell. Did he say which Morgan caught his eye?" "No, just that he wanted to discuss purchasing one." Preston shrugged. "I'll see him tomorrow then." Speaking of tomorrow, he hesitated, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "The town's having its spring social. Dancing, food, that sort of thing. I was wondering if you might want to attend with me." The invitation caught Daisy off guard. As your assistant, as my guest," Preston clarified, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. "Though if you prefer to call it a business arrangement, that's fine too." Daisy considered declining. Public gatherings increased the risk of being recognized, and after spotting Lawrence Bishop, she was more anxious than ever. But the hopeful expression in Preston's eyes made her reconsider. "I'd like that," she found herself saying. "Thank you." Preston's smile was worth the risk. "Good, that's good. I'll meet you here at 7 then." The next day passed in a blur of anticipation and dread. Daisy used a small portion of her savings to purchase a simple blue dress from the mercantile, nothing fancy, but nicer than the practical clothes she'd been wearing for work. As she prepared for the evening, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her basin. For the first time in months, color had returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes had diminished. Telluride and perhaps Preston Irwin was proving to be good for her. The town hall had been decorated with spring flowers and lanterns for the social. A small band played lively tunes as couples spun around the dance floor. Preston, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his usual work clothes exchanged for something more suitable for the occasion, was attentive and considerate. Daisy found herself relaxing as the evening progressed, even accepting invitations to dance from Preston and a few other respectable men from town. During a break in the music, Preston brought her a cup of punch. "You're quite the dancer, Miss Fitzgerald. Another skill your father taught you." Daisy smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given anyone in Telluride. "Actually, my mother insisted on dance lessons, said no daughter of hers would stumble around a ballroom like a newborn colt." "Wise woman, your mother," Preston commented. He hesitated, then added, "You don't have to tell me, but I'm curious what brings a well-bred woman like yourself to a place like Telluride, working in a stable of all things." Daisy's smile faded. "You're right, Mr. Irwin, I don't have to tell you." Preston nodded, accepting her boundary without offense. "Fair enough, but if you ever want to talk, I'm a good listener." Before Daisy could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Lawrence Bishop had entered, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on Preston and then shifted to Daisy. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," Bishop said loudly, advancing toward them, "if it isn't Mrs. Alina Hammond far from home." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people turned to stare. Daisy felt the blood drain from her face. "You've mistaken me for someone else," she said, her voice barely audible. Bishop laughed. "No mistake, you're Thomas Hammond's wife, or should I say, his runaway wife. He's been searching for you for months." Preston stepped slightly in front of Daisy, his posture protective. "The lady said you're mistaken, Mr. Bishop." "The lady is a liar," Bishop retorted, "and a thief. She stole money from her husband before disappearing." Daisy's hands trembled as she set down her punch cup. That's not true. Thomas is offering a substantial reward for information leading to your return, Bishop continued as if she hadn't spoken. I intend to collect it. Preston's voice remained calm, but Daisy could see tension in his shoulders. This is neither the time nor place for such accusations. I suggest you leave, Mr. Bishop. The sheriff of Telluride, attracted by the disturbance, approached the group. Everything all right here? Bishop turned to the lawman. Sheriff, this woman is a fugitive. Her name is Eleanor Hammond, and she's wanted in Denver for theft and abandonment of her marital obligations. The sheriff looked at Daisy with newfound suspicion. That true, miss? Daisy straightened her spine, summoning what dignity she could. My name is Daisy Fitzgerald. I am not this Eleanor person, and I have stolen nothing from anyone. Preston placed a supportive hand at the small of her back. Sheriff Taylor, I can vouch for Miss Fitzgerald's character. She's worked for me for over a month without incident. Sheriff Taylor scratched his beard, looking uncertain. Well, I can't arrest someone based on one man's claim of mistaken identity, but if there's an official warrant. He turned to Bishop. You got paperwork from Denver authorities. Bishop's expression soured. Not on my person, but I can wire for it. You do that, the sheriff replied. Until then, no more disrupting our town's social. Clear? Bishop glared at Daisy. This isn't over, he promised before departing. The damage, however, was done. Whispers circulated through the hall, and previously friendly faces now regarded Daisy with suspicion and curiosity. The joyful atmosphere of the evening had evaporated. I should go, Daisy murmured to Preston. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll walk you back. The night air was cool as they made their silent journey to the livery stable. When they reached the door to her small room, Daisy finally spoke. I'm sorry, Preston. I never meant to bring trouble to your door. Preston leaned against the doorframe, studying her face in the moonlight. Is it true? Are you Eleanor Hammond? Daisy closed her eyes briefly, then met his gaze. I don't use that name anymore. And the rest of it, the theft. I took nothing that wasn't rightfully mine, she said firmly. The money was my inheritance from my mother. Thomas controlled everything else. I needed something to survive on. Preston nodded slowly. And you left your husband because? Daisy's hand unconsciously moved to her ribcage where the faded bruises still occasionally ached, because he would have killed me eventually. No one believed me, of course. Thomas Hammond is a respected businessman in Denver society. His wife, however, was considered hysterical, ungrateful, and according to the whispers I overheard at social gatherings, barren. She laughed bitterly. They said I was a bad wife who couldn't even provide an heir. Preston's expression darkened. A man who raises his hand to a woman isn't worthy of the title husband, respected businessman or not. The law doesn't see it that way, Daisy replied. A husband has rights over his wife, including the right to discipline her as he sees fit. The law isn't always right, Preston said quietly. What will you do now? Daisy sighed. Leave, I suppose. Bishop will wire Denver and a warrant will arrive. I can't put you in the position of harboring a fugitive. Preston straightened. You're assuming I care about that. You should. Your reputation in this town, my reputation, can weather a storm or two, he interrupted. Besides, no one in Telluride much cares what Denver thinks anyway. But if you want to leave, I won't stop you. I just want you to know you have a choice this time. The sincerity in his eyes made Daisy's heart ache. How long had it been since someone had offered her a choice about her own life? Thank you, she whispered. I'll think about it. Preston nodded and stepped back. Good night, Daisy Fitzgerald. Sleep well. Daisy didn't sleep. She packed her few belongings and penned a note thanking Preston for his kindness. By dawn, she had saddled her horse and was preparing to slip away before the town awakened. But as she led her mount from the stable, Preston emerged from the shadows, fully dressed and alert. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Daisy sighed. You know I am. Without saying goodbye, goodbyes are harder, she admitted. It seemed kinder this way. Preston approached, taking the reins from her hand. Kinder to whom? Not to me. Preston, I have a proposition, he cut in. Stay at least until the warrant arrives. If it arrives, Bishop might be bluffing. Daisy shook her head. He isn't. Thomas will have filed charges. Even so, let's see what the charges actually are. Theft can be disproven if you can show the money was yours. As for abandoning your marital obligations, Preston's mouth twisted in distaste. No court in Colorado territory would force a woman back to a man who beats her. You don't know Thomas, Daisy said quietly. He has influence, connections. And I have friends, Preston countered. Including Judge Wilson, who rides circuit through here every month and happens to be an old friend of my father's. He arrives next week. Daisy hesitated, hope warring with fear. What are you suggesting? Talk to the judge. Tell him your story. He's a fair man and he has no love for men who abuse their power or their wives. The idea was tempting. Daisy had been running for so long that the thought of standing her ground was both terrifying and exhilarating. And if it doesn't work? She asked. Preston's gaze was steady. Then I'll help you disappear. I know these mountains better than any lawman from Denver ever could. Daisy searched his face. Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know? Preston stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. Because in the short time I've known you, Daisy Fitzgerald or Alina Hammond, or whatever name you choose, I've seen your courage, your dignity, your kindness with animals and people alike. And I think. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think you might be the only purely good thing I've encountered in a long while. His words wrapped around Daisy's heart like a warm blanket. For months, she'd been the bad wife, the woman who failed her husband, who wasn't woman enough to endure what society expected her to endure. Preston's assessment of her character was so at odds with how she'd been made to see herself that tears sprang to her eyes. I'm not as good as you think, she whispered. Preston smiled gently. Let me be the judge of that. He tugged lightly on the reins. Come on, let's put your horse back in the stable and I'll make us some breakfast. We can talk more about what to do next. Daisy allowed him to lead her back inside. As the sun rose over Telluride, painting the mountains gold, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, hope. The next few days were tense. Lawrence Bishop made good on his promise and wired Denver. 3 days later, Sheriff Taylor arrived at the livery with papers in hand. Miss Fitzgerald, he said gravely, or should I say Mrs. Hammond? Daisy straightened from where she was brushing a mare. Yes, Sheriff, got a response from the Denver authorities. He held up the papers. There is indeed a warrant for the arrest of Alina Hammond on charges of theft of property and abandonment of marital duties. Preston, who had been working nearby, moved to stand beside Daisy. What's the next step, Sheriff? Sheriff Taylor sighed. Normally, I'd be obliged to take you into custody until you could be transported back to Denver. He noted the way Preston tensed and added, but there are some irregularities in this situation. What kind of irregularities? Daisy asked cautiously. For one, the warrant was issued by a local magistrate who happens to be your husband's cousin. For another, Judge Wilson arrives tomorrow, and I'd rather have his opinion on a matter that crosses territorial jurisdictions. Hope fluttered in Daisy's chest. So you're not arresting me today? No, the sheriff decided. But I'll need your word you won't flee town before seeing the judge. You have it, Daisy promised. After the sheriff left, Preston let out a long breath. That's a stroke of luck. Taylor's a good man, fair. And he mentioned the connection between the magistrate and your husband. He's already suspicious of the warrant's legitimacy. Daisy nodded, though anxiety still gnawed at her. What if the judge decides to send me back anyway? Preston's expression was resolute. Then we move to Plan B. But let's have faith in Plan A first. Judge Wilson arrived the next day as scheduled. He was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered despite his advanced years, with a full white beard and penetrating gray eyes. The hearing was held in the town hall, the same room where Daisy had been exposed just days earlier. Lawrence Bishop was present, smirking confidently as he prepared to testify against her. Judge Wilson called the informal hearing to order. I understand we have a matter concerning a fugitive from Denver, he began, reviewing the paperwork before him. Mrs. Alina Hammond, charged with theft of property valued at $5,000 and abandonment of marital duties. Bishop stepped forward. That's correct, Your Honor. I am here representing Thomas Hammond's interests. The money she took was business capital from his company accounts. I see. The judge turned to Daisy. And you, madam, what do you say to these charges? Daisy rose, her voice steadier than she felt. The money in question was my inheritance from my mother's estate, held in trust until my 21st birthday. I have documentation to prove it. She presented a packet of papers she'd kept hidden in a secret compartment of her saddle, the only proof she had of her claim to the funds. Judge Wilson examined the documents carefully. These appear to be in order. The trust clearly stipulates that the sum of $5,000 was to be transferred to Alina Fitzgerald, your maiden name, I presume upon her 21st birthday, with no conditions or restrictions on its use. Bishop sputtered, but Your Honor, once she married, all her property became her husband's by law. Not necessarily, the judge countered. Colorado territory has provisions for separate property, particularly inherited assets. According to these documents, the funds were deposited in her name at Denver National Bank 3 years ago, before her marriage. He looked at Daisy. Did you withdraw these funds from your own account, Mrs. Hammond? I did, Daisy confirmed. The account was in my name alone. The judge nodded, making notes. As for the abandonment charge, that's more complicated. Marriage is a sacred contract, and the courts generally prefer to see reconciliation rather than separation. He peered at Daisy over his spectacles. Why did you leave your husband, Mrs. Hammond? The room fell silent. Daisy felt every eye upon her as she gathered her courage. Because he beat me, Your Honor, regularly and severely. Her voice trembled slightly but grew stronger as she continued. The last time he broke 2 of my ribs and threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Bishop laughed dismissively. Preposterous. Thomas Hammond is one of Denver's most respected citizens. He would never be quiet, sir, Judge Wilson ordered sharply. Unless you were present in their home, you cannot testify to what did or did not occur between husband and wife. He turned back to Daisy. Do you have any evidence of these claims? Only my word, Daisy admitted. And this. She unbuttoned the top buttons of her high-necked blouse, turning to show a scar that ran along her collarbone. He did this with a letter opener when I suggested visiting my aunt without him. The judge's expression hardened. I see, and did you seek help before fleeing? I tried, Daisy said, rebuttoning her blouse. I went to the local constable, but he was a friend of Thomas's. He sent me home, told me to be a better wife. Her voice broke. I went to our pastor, who told me to pray for patience and submission. I went to Thomas's mother, who told me that all men have tempers and I needed to learn not to provoke him. Preston, who had been sitting silently in the gallery, stood. Your Honor, if I may speak, the judge nodded his permission. I've employed Miss Fitzgerald, as she now calls herself, for over a month. I've found her to be honest, hardworking, and of excellent character. Whatever her reasons for leaving Denver, she has conducted herself with dignity and integrity here in Telluride. Judge Wilson considered this. Your name, sir? Preston Irwin, Your Honor. I own the livery stable. Any relation to Nathaniel Irwin of Kansas City? Preston looked surprised. He was my father. The judge's expression softened slightly. I knew your father well. He was a man of integrity. He returned his attention to the matter at hand. I'm inclined to dismiss the theft charge, as the documents clearly show the money was Mrs. Hammond's separate property. He frowned. As for the abandonment charge, while the law does not explicitly recognize mistreatment as grounds for separation, neither does it condone violence within marriage. He thought for a moment, then announced, Here is my ruling. The theft charge is dismissed entirely. Regarding the abandonment charge, I am issuing a stay. Mrs. Hammond is not required to return to Denver or to her husband's custody at this time. However, Mr. Hammond may petition for a formal divorce hearing if he wishes to pursue the matter further. Bishop jumped to his feet. This is outrageous. Thomas Hammond will not accept. Mr. Hammond will accept the ruling of this court, Judge Wilson interrupted firmly, or he can appear before me himself to argue otherwise. Is that clear? Fuming, Bishop nodded curtly. Good. This hearing is adjourned. The judge banged his gavel. Relief washed over Daisy so powerfully that her legs nearly gave way. Preston was at her side instantly, a supportive hand under her elbow. "You did it," he murmured. "You stood your ground." Tears filled her eyes. "We did it. I couldn't have faced this without you." As they left the town hall together, Lawrence Bishop intercepted them, his face mottled with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Thomas won't let you get away with this humiliation. He'll come for you himself." Preston stepped between them. "I suggest you deliver a message to Mr. Hammond along with the news of the judge's ruling. Tell him that his wife has found protection and friends in Telluride. Tell him that if he values his reputation and his health, he'll accept the judge's decision and leave her be." Bishop sneered. "Big talk from a small-town horse trainer. Just deliver the message," Preston replied evenly. As Bishop stormed away toward the telegraph office, Daisy turned to Preston. "Did you mean that, about protection and friends?" Preston's expression softened. "Every word." "You're not alone anymore, Daisy." The weight of those words settled around her heart. Not alone. After months of solitary fear, the promise of companionship and security was overwhelming. Life in Telluride gradually returned to normal in the weeks following the hearing. Bishop left town, presumably to deliver the bad news to Thomas Hammond in Denver. The initial gossip about Daisy's past eventually gave way to newer, more interesting town scandals. To her surprise, many of Telluride's residents, particularly the women, showed her increased kindness after learning of her circumstances. By June, Daisy had settled into a rhythm at the livery stable. Her skills with horses had improved under Preston's tutelage, and she found genuine satisfaction in the work. More importantly, she and Preston had developed a friendship that increasingly hinted at deeper feelings. They took to riding together on Sundays, exploring the magnificent country surrounding Telluride. During one such ride, they stopped at an alpine meadow bursting with wildflowers, the perfect spot for the picnic lunch they'd packed. As they spread a blanket on the grass, Preston seemed unusually pensive. "Something on your mind?" Daisy asked, handing him a sandwich. He accepted it with a distracted smile. "Just thinking about how much has changed in the past few months. For me especially," Daisy agreed. "I arrived in Telluride expecting to pass through, just another stop while running from my past. I never imagined I'd find this." She gestured to the meadow, the mountains, and finally to Preston himself. "And what exactly is this?" Preston asked, his blue eyes intent. Daisy felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Peace, purpose, the chance to be myself without fear. Is that all?" There was a hint of disappointment in his voice. Gathering her courage, Daisy met his gaze directly. "No, that's not all." Preston set aside his sandwich and moved closer to her on the blanket. "Daisy Fitzgerald, I've been trying to find the right words for weeks now. I'm not a poetic man, but I need you to know that my life is better with you in it. You've brought something to Telluride to me that I didn't even know was missing." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first day when you rode into town looking like you carried the weight of the world on your shoulders. I wanted to take some of that weight then, and I still do now." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes. "Preston, you don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know your past makes this complicated. I know you might not be ready." Daisy silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Preston's arms encircled her, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Daisy rested her forehead against his. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Why?" Preston asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because I've been hurt before. Because loving someone means being vulnerable. Because I'm still legally married to a man who considers me his property." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We'll take it slowly then, one day at a time. And if Thomas Hammond ever shows his face in Telluride, he'll find that you're not without protection." Daisy smiled through her tears. "You know, for a man who claims not to be poetic, you say the most beautiful things." Their courtship progressed cautiously but steadily throughout the summer. Preston was patient, never pushing for more than Daisy was ready to give. They kept their relationship mostly private, though the townspeople of Telluride weren't blind to the obvious affection between them. In late August, as the aspens began showing hints of gold, a telegram arrived for Daisy. Sheriff Taylor delivered it personally to the livery stable, his expression grave. "From Denver," he said, handing her the envelope. Daisy's hands trembled as she opened it, Preston hovering protectively nearby. As she read the brief message, her face paled. "What is it?" Preston asked anxiously. "Thomas," she whispered. "He's coming to Telluride. The telegram says he'll arrive on tomorrow's stage to resolve our situation personally." Preston's jaw tightened. "We knew this might happen eventually." "What do I do? The judge's ruling doesn't prevent him from coming here." "He's still legally my husband, but he has no legal right to force you back to Denver," Preston reminded her. "Judge Wilson made that clear." Daisy paced the small office. "You don't understand. Thomas doesn't always abide by legal constraints. He gets what he wants one way or another." Sheriff Taylor, who had remained silent during their exchange, finally spoke up. "Miss Fitzgerald, you should know that in Telluride we take care of our own. If your husband comes here making threats or causing trouble, he'll find himself in my jail." Daisy gave the sheriff a grateful look. "Thank you, Sheriff, but Thomas is clever. He rarely makes direct threats in public. He's careful about appearances." "Well, he'll be under my watch from the moment he arrives," the sheriff promised before taking his leave. That night, Daisy couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring at the stars and wondering what Thomas's arrival would bring. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Daisy, are you awake?" Preston's voice was low. She opened the door to find him looking as sleepless as she felt. "I couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow," he explained. "Neither could I." Preston entered her small room, taking a seat on the single chair while she perched on the edge of her bed. "I have an idea," he said after a moment. "It's unorthodox and you can say no, but I want you to consider it." Daisy raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Marry me." She blinked in surprise. "Preston, I'm already married. That's the whole problem. Not legally," he clarified. "Obviously, we can't have a legal ceremony, but we could have a public commitment in front of the town before Thomas arrives. It would send a message that you've moved on, that you have a new life here, that you're protected." "A symbolic marriage," Daisy mused. "Would anyone even recognize such a thing?" Preston shrugged. "Frontier justice is often more practical than formal law. In the eyes of Telluride, it would establish you as my wife, not Hammond's. And when your divorce eventually comes through, we can make it legal." The idea was radical, unconventional, and surprisingly appealing. What would people say? They'd know it's not legally binding. "They'd understand why we're doing it," Preston assured her. "This town has already taken your side against Hammond. They've seen who you really are." Daisy considered the proposal. It wasn't how she had imagined accepting a marriage proposal, but then again, nothing about her life had followed the expected path. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I want it to be because we truly intend to marry when it becomes legally possible, not just as a strategy against Thomas." Preston knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Daisy Fitzgerald, I want to marry you because I love you. The timing of this proposal has to do with Hammond, yes, but the intention behind it is purely about us. I want to build a life with you, here in Telluride, with or without your former husband's interference." Tears blurred Daisy's vision as she nodded. "Then yes, let's do it." The impromptu ceremony was arranged for noon the next day, 3 hours before Thomas Hammond's scheduled arrival on the stage from Silverton. Word spread quickly through town, and by morning it seemed everyone in Telluride knew about the unusual event planned at the town square. Reverend Phillips, who normally would have refused to participate in such an unorthodox ceremony, surprised everyone by agreeing to officiate. "While I cannot perform a legal marriage ceremony for a woman who is still legally wed to another," he explained to Preston, "I can offer a blessing on your commitment to one another. The Lord knows what is truly in your hearts, regardless of man's laws." By midday, the town square was filled with curious and supportive townsfolk. Someone had erected a simple wooden arch decorated with wildflowers. Mrs. Jenkins from the Mercantile had loaned Daisy a blue dress with white lace trim, something nice but not too bridal, she'd said with a wink. As Daisy walked toward Preston, who waited beneath the arch looking handsome in his best suit, She felt a surprising sense of peace. This might not be a legal wedding, but the sentiment behind it was more genuine than the lavish Denver ceremony that had bound her to Thomas Hammond 3 years earlier. Reverend Phillips spoke eloquently about commitment, protection, and new beginnings. Preston and Daisy exchanged simple promises to care for and respect one another. When Preston placed a silver ring on her finger, it was my mother's. He whispered. Tears flowed freely down Daisy's cheeks. While this ceremony does not constitute a legal marriage, the Reverend concluded, let it be known to all present that Preston Irwin and Daisy Fitzgerald have pledged themselves to one another in good faith, with the intention of formalizing their union when circumstances permit. May God bless this commitment. The gathered crowd applauded as Preston kissed Daisy gently. For a moment, she forgot about Thomas's impending arrival, lost in the joy of the moment and the community's support. The celebration that followed was brief but heartfelt. The town's women had prepared food, and someone brought out a fiddle. For 2 precious hours, Daisy allowed herself to believe in the future she and Preston had promised each other. But as the stage's arrival time approached, reality intruded on their celebration. Preston noticed Daisy's growing tension and led her away from the gathering. Remember, he said quietly, you're not alone anymore. We'll face him together. Sheriff Taylor joined them as they walked toward the stage depot. I'll be there when Hammond steps off that coach, he assured them. Any trouble and he'll be having supper in my jail tonight. The stage arrived precisely on schedule, dust billowing around the team of horses as the driver pulled them to a halt. Daisy stood between Preston and the sheriff, her heart hammering as passengers began to disembark. Thomas Hammond was the 3rd person to step down from the coach. Daisy hadn't seen him in nearly a year, but he looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, his dark hair and mustache perfectly groomed, his posture radiating authority and confidence. His eyes scanned the small crowd until they found her, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes spread across his face. Eleanor, he called, striding forward. At last. Preston's arm tightened around Daisy's waist as Sheriff Taylor stepped forward to intercept Thomas. Mr. Hammond, I presume, the sheriff said. I'm Sheriff Taylor. I understand you've come to speak with Miss Fitzgerald. Thomas's smile faltered slightly at the use of Daisy's chosen name. I've come to collect my wife, actually, a private family matter. Nothing about this matter is private anymore, the sheriff replied evenly. Judge Wilson has already ruled that Miss Fitzgerald is not required to return to Denver with you. Thomas's expression hardened. I'm aware of the judge's creative interpretation of the law. I'm also aware that frontier justice often lacks the sophistication of proper courts. I've come to speak with Eleanor directly, not to argue with local authorities. His gaze shifted to Preston, noting his arm around Daisy's waist. And you must be the horseman I've heard about. Mr. Irwin, is it? I appreciate your assistance in locating my wife, but your services are no longer required. Preston's blue eyes were cold as ice. Daisy isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Daisy, Thomas laughed. Is that what she's calling herself now? How quaint. He returned his attention to Daisy. Eleanor, this charade has gone on long enough. It's time to come home. I'm prepared to be magnanimous about your indiscretions, if you return voluntarily. Daisy felt a familiar fear rising in her chest, the old instinct to placate him, to avoid his wrath. But Preston's steady presence beside her gave her strength. I am home, Thomas, she said, her voice clear and steady. I'm not returning to Denver with you, not today, not ever. Thomas's facade of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold anger beneath. You don't have a choice. You're my wife, in name only, Daisy countered, and hopefully not for much longer. Ah yes, I heard about your little ceremony today, Thomas sneered. Playing house with the local stable boy, how far you've fallen, Eleanor. Preston tensed beside her, but Daisy squeezed his hand in warning. Thomas was trying to provoke a confrontation. Mr. Hammond, Sheriff Taylor interjected, Miss Fitzgerald has made her position clear. Now, you're welcome to stay in Telluride. We've got a fine hotel, but any attempt to force or coerce her will result in your immediate arrest. Thomas assessed the situation, the determined sheriff, the protective stance of Preston, and the gathering crowd of curious townsfolk, many of whom were regarding him with open hostility. "Very well," he said smoothly, his businessman's instincts taking over. "I can see this conversation would be better continued privately. Eleanor, I'll be staying at the hotel. I expect you to call on me there tomorrow morning so we can discuss our situation like civilized people." Without waiting for her response, he collected his valise and walked toward the hotel, his bearing proud despite the defeat. "You don't have to meet with him," Preston said as they watched Thomas's retreating figure. Daisy sighed. "Yes, I do. This won't end until I face him directly." She turned to Preston, determination in her eyes. "But I won't face him alone. Will you come with me?" "Try and stop me," Preston replied, bringing her hand to his lips. The next morning, Daisy dressed with care in her most practical, no-nonsense outfit, a statement that she was no longer the decorative, submissive wife Thomas had expected her to be. Preston was similarly prepared, dressed respectably but comfortably, a silent message that he belonged at Daisy's side. Thomas had secured the hotel's finest room, and when they knocked on his door, he opened it with the confident air of a man accustomed to controlling every situation. "Eleanor," he greeted her, deliberately ignoring Preston. "Please come in." The room was spacious by Telluride standards, with a sitting area separate from the bedroom. Thomas had arranged for tea to be served, a civilized touch that Daisy recognized as part of his strategy to remind her of the refined life she'd left behind. "I see you've brought your friend," Thomas observed as Preston followed Daisy into the room. "That wasn't necessary." "Mr. Irwin stays," Daisy said firmly, taking a seat on the small sofa. Preston remained standing, positioned slightly behind her chair, a silent guardian. Thomas seated himself across from her, pouring tea with practiced elegance. "You look well, Eleanor. Country living seems to agree with you. Though I must say your hands." He glanced pointedly at her work-roughened fingers. "Such a shame." "My hands show honest work," Daisy replied evenly. "What did you want to discuss, Thomas?" He sipped his tea before answering. "I've come to offer you terms for a quiet return to Denver. Your escapade has caused quite a stir in our social circle, as I'm sure you intended, but I'm willing to tell everyone you've been recuperating from illness at a private sanatorium. Your reputation could be salvaged." "And in return?" Daisy asked, though she already knew the answer. "You return to your duties as my wife, with some additional restrictions, of course, given your proven unreliability." Preston made a sound of disgust from behind Daisy's chair. Thomas glanced at him with disdain. "Something to contribute, Mr. Irwin." "Just marveling at your delusion that Daisy would ever consider returning to a man who broke her ribs and threatened to kill her," Preston replied coldly. Thomas's expression darkened. "My wife has always had a flair for dramatic exaggeration." "Whatever she's told you, I saw the scars," Preston interrupted. "I heard her testimony before the judge, and unlike the people in Denver, I believed her." Thomas set down his teacup with a sharp click. "Eleanor has always been high-strung, prone to hysteria. Her mother was the same way. The discipline I provided was for her own good, to help her become the wife she was meant to be." Daisy felt a familiar chill at his words, the same justifications he'd always used, the same way he'd twisted reality to make his cruelty seem reasonable. "I didn't come here to debate the past," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I came to tell you face to face that our marriage is over. I won't be returning to Denver. I won't be returning to you, ever." Thomas's mask of civility slipped further. "You have no choice. The law is on my side. The law gave Judge Wilson the authority to rule that I don't have to return to your custody," Daisy countered. "And if you try to force me, Sheriff Taylor will arrest you." "One backwater judge in a mining town doesn't overrule state law," Thomas snapped. "I have friends in the territorial government. I can have Wilson's ruling overturned." "Perhaps," Preston interjected, "but that would take time, and during that time Daisy remains free to live her life as she chooses." Thomas's gaze shifted between them, calculation evident in his eyes. "I see." You really believe you've found a new life here, don't you, Eleanor? Playing at being a frontier woman shacking up with a horse trainer. He laughed coldly. How long before the novelty wears off, before you miss the comforts of Denver society, before your protector tires of the complications you bring? That's enough, Preston said sharply. Thomas ignored him, leaning forward to address Daisy directly. I know you, Eleanor, better than this man ever could. I know your weaknesses, your fears. You crave security, respectability. You can't find that here living in sin with we held a commitment ceremony yesterday, Daisy interrupted. In front of the entire town. They recognize me as Preston's wife now, not yours. Thomas blinked, genuinely surprised for the first time. A ceremony without a divorce. It's meaningless, legally speaking. Not to us, Daisy replied, and not to Telluride. For a long moment, Thomas simply stared at her, reassessing the situation. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. Very well. If you're determined to humiliate me this way, I can be equally determined. You want a divorce. Fine, I'll grant you one on grounds of adultery. Your reputation will be ruined beyond repair. No respectable household in Colorado territory will receive you. Your father's name, your family's name will be dragged through the mud. He smiled thinly. Is that what you want, Eleanor? Daisy felt sick at the threat, but she held her ground. If that's the price of freedom, I'll pay it. Thomas's expression hardened. And what about the price your stable boy will pay? Do you think a scandal won't affect his business, his standing in this little community? Are you willing to destroy his life along with yours? Before Daisy could respond, Preston moved to stand beside her chair, his hand coming to rest supportively on her shoulder. Mr. Hammond, he said, his voice level but firm, you came here believing you could intimidate Daisy into returning with you. You've failed. She's made her choice, and that choice is to remain in Telluride. As for your threats, they only reveal your desperation. Thomas stood abruptly. This conversation is over. Eleanor, I'll be returning to Denver tomorrow. You have until then to reconsider your position. If you don't come to your senses, expect legal proceedings to begin immediately. Then I'll expect legal proceedings, Daisy replied with a calmness she didn't entirely feel. Goodbye, Thomas. They left the hotel room with Thomas glaring after them, his tea untouched and cooling on the table. Outside in the fresh mountain air, Daisy finally allowed herself to tremble. He'll do it, Preston. He'll make the divorce as ugly and public as possible. Preston guided her to a bench in the small park across from the hotel. Let him try. Judge Wilson already knows the truth. So do the people of Telluride. Thomas can smear your name in Denver society, but that's a world you've already left behind. But what about you? Your business? Thomas was right, a scandal could hurt you too. Preston smiled gently. Daisy, do you really think the people of Telluride care more about a Denver businessman's accusations than what they've seen with their own eyes? They know you, they know me, they know us together. His confidence steadied her. So we just wait, see what he does next. We live our lives, Preston corrected. Together, let Thomas do his worst. We'll face it as it comes. True to his word, Thomas Hammond departed on the following day's stage, his cold glare following Daisy and Preston as they deliberately positioned themselves near the depot to witness his departure. The moment the stage disappeared from view, Daisy felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It's not over, she warned Preston as they walked back to the livery. He'll file for divorce, but he'll make it as painful as possible. Preston squeezed her hand. Then we'll weather that storm when it comes, together. The storm arrived 3 weeks later in the form of official papers delivered by the stage driver. The divorce petition filed by Thomas Hammond cited adultery and moral abandonment as grounds, with specific allegations that Eleanor Hammond had engaged in an illicit relationship with Preston Irwin of Telluride. Sheriff Taylor delivered the papers to the livery himself, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry, Daisy, this is ugly business. Daisy scanned the documents, her face paling at the vicious language Thomas had employed. According to the petition, she was a woman of loose morals and hysterical temperament who had abandoned her sacred marital duties to engage in licentious behavior with a common horse trainer. Preston read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. He really is determined to drag your name through the mud. And yours, Daisy pointed out. He calls you a seducer of married women and accuses you of harboring a fugitive wife for immoral purposes. Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. Judge Wilson returns next month. He'll want to see these papers and hear your response. Daisy nodded. Thank you, Sheriff. We'll be ready. After the sheriff departed, Preston paced the small office. This is exactly what he threatened. He's trying to make the divorce so scandalous and painful that you'll give up and return to him. He doesn't know me very well then, Daisy replied, a new determination in her voice. I survived his fists, Preston. I can survive his lies. True to Daisy's prediction, news of the divorce petition spread quickly through Telluride. To her surprise, the town's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Mrs. Jenkins from the Mercantile made a point of loudly declaring that she'd never heard such nonsense in all her days. Sheriff Taylor politely declined to discuss the matter with curious visitors from neighboring towns. Even Reverend Phillips, after his initial discomfort with the situation, offered a sermon on the dangers of false witness and the sin of cruelty within marriage. When Judge Wilson arrived the following month, he summoned Daisy and Preston to a private meeting in the sheriff's office rather than a public hearing. I've reviewed Hammond's petition, the judge said without preamble. It's vindictive, exaggerated, and clearly designed to cause maximum distress. He looked at Daisy sympathetically. Unfortunately, under territorial law, his accusations, however false, provide grounds for divorce. So he wins, Daisy said flatly. Not necessarily, Judge Wilson countered. While I can't prevent him from obtaining a divorce on these terms, I can control how the proceedings unfold in this jurisdiction. He tapped the papers with a gnarled finger. Hammond demands your return to Denver to face these charges in person. I see no reason to grant that request. Hope flickered in Daisy's chest. What does that mean exactly? It means, the judge explained, that I can hear your response to these allegations here in Telluride, then provide my findings to the Denver court. You need never set foot in Denver for these proceedings. Preston leaned forward. And what about the nature of the allegations, the damage to Daisy's reputation? Judge Wilson smiled slightly. Court documents are public record, Mr. Irwin, but how widely they're circulated is another matter. Hammond clearly hopes for a public spectacle. I prefer a quieter approach. So what happens now? Daisy asked. You file a formal response to the petition. Deny the allegations of adultery, which I understand to be false, given that you and Mr. Irwin have maintained separate residences despite your commitment ceremony. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. That's correct, Your Honor, Preston confirmed. We've been traditional in that regard. The judge nodded approvingly. Good, that strengthens your position. You should also counter with your own grounds for the divorce, specifically cruel treatment and physical abuse. Daisy frowned. But without proof, your testimony is evidence, Mrs. Hammond, the judge interrupted gently. As is the testimony of Dr. Evans, who I believe examined you shortly after your arrival in Telluride and noted healing rib fractures consistent with your account. Daisy looked surprised. I didn't realize he would remember that. I've already spoken with him, Judge Wilson admitted. He's willing to provide a statement. Preston reached for Daisy's hand. What's the likely outcome, Judge? Will Hammond succeed in preventing the divorce? No, the judge said confidently. Hammond will get his divorce, just not on the terms he expects, and Mrs. Hammond will be free to pursue her future, including, perhaps, a legal marriage when the time comes. His eyes twinkled as he glanced at their clasped hands. The divorce proceedings played out largely as Judge Wilson predicted. Thomas Hammond raged when informed that his wife would not be required to return to Denver, but his attorneys advised him that pursuing the matter would only prolong the process. In the end, he accepted a much quieter divorce than he had initially demanded, with mutual allegations of abandonment that saved face for both parties. The final decree arrived in Telluride on a crisp October day, just as the aspen leaves reached their golden peak. Sheriff Taylor personally delivered the document to Daisy at the livery stable. "Congratulations, Miss Fitzgerald," he said with a smile. "You're officially a free woman." Daisy stared at the paper, scarcely able to believe the simple words that dissolved her 3-year nightmare of a marriage. "It's really over," she whispered. Preston, who had been shoeing a horse in the back of the stable, emerged with a questioning look. Daisy held up the document wordlessly, her eyes filling with tears of relief. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, sweeping her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. "Free," he murmured into her hair. "Finally free." Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "I suppose this means Telluride will be planning another wedding, soon a legal one this time." Preston set Daisy gently on her feet but kept an arm around her waist. "If the lady is willing," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "The lady is very willing," Daisy replied, laughing through her tears. They were married 2 weeks later in Telluride's small church, with Reverend Phillips officiating a proper legal ceremony this time. The entire town turned out for the occasion, transforming it from a simple wedding into a community celebration. Mrs. Sullivan, who had refused to hire Daisy months earlier, provided a magnificent wedding cake. Sheriff Taylor stood as Preston's best man. Even Judge Wilson delayed his departure from town to attend, presenting the couple with a finely bound family Bible as a wedding gift. "I've presided over hundreds of unions in my career," the judge told them at the reception, "but few have been as hard-won or as deserving of celebration as yours." As Preston led Daisy in their first dance as husband and wife, he whispered in her ear, "Remember when we first met and you wouldn't even tell me your surname?" She smiled up at him. "I was trying to outrun my past, and now I'm embracing my future, Mrs. Daisy Irwin." Preston's arms tightened around her. "They said you were a bad wife," he murmured, "but you're the only truly good thing I've ever known." In the years that followed, the story of Preston and Daisy Irwin became something of a Telluride legend, how a runaway wife found sanctuary in their mountain town. How a quiet horseman stood against Denver society to protect her. How love flourished in the shadow of the San Juan Mountains. Their livery stable prospered, expanding to include a horse breeding operation that became known throughout Colorado territory for its quality stock. Preston's skill with difficult horses drew clients from as far as California and Texas, while Daisy developed a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers for ladies riding mounts in the West. A year after their wedding, Daisy gave birth to their first child, a son they named William, after Preston's grandfather. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, whom they named Margaret after Daisy's beloved mother. As the children grew, they learned the family business alongside their parents, developing the same respect and love for horses that had initially drawn Preston and Daisy together. Thomas Hammond remained in Denver, eventually remarrying a young society woman who gave him the sons he had demanded from Daisy. Occasionally, news of his business dealings or social activities reached Telluride, but Daisy found that such reports no longer stirred fear or anger in her heart. The past had lost its power over her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Daisy with the deed to a piece of land just outside town, 20 acres of prime valley property, with a view of the mountains and a clear stream running through it. "For our new home," he explained as they stood on a rise overlooking the property. "The children need more space to run, and I thought you might like a proper house after all these years of living above the stable." Daisy surveyed the beautiful landscape, imagining their future unfolding in this place. "It's perfect," she said, leaning into his embrace, "just like the life we've built together." Preston kissed the top of her head. "Not always perfect," he corrected gently. "We've had our share of difficulties." This was true. They had weathered financial hardships when a harsh winter killed several valuable horses. They had endured the worry when young William contracted scarlet fever and hovered near death for days. They had argued and reconciled and grown stronger through each challenge. "Not perfect," Daisy agreed, "but real, honest, ours." Preston turned her in his arms so he could look into her eyes that no longer held the shadows of fear she'd carried when she first arrived in Telluride. "I have never regretted a single moment of our life together," he said softly. "Not even the difficult ones." "Nor have I," Daisy replied, reaching up to trace the lines that time and weather had etched around his eyes. "You saved me, Preston Irwin." He shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. You had the courage to leave, to start over, to trust again. I just had the good fortune to be the man you trusted." As they stood together on their new land, planning their future home, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a frightened runaway to a beloved wife, mother, and respected businesswoman. The people of Denver might still whisper about Alina Hammond's scandalous departure from society, but here in Telluride, Daisy Irwin had found her true self and her true home. Later that evening, as they celebrated their anniversary with a small gathering of close friends at the hotel restaurant, Sheriff Taylor, now gray-haired but still serving the town, raised his glass in a toast. "To Preston and Daisy," he said, "who taught Telluride that love isn't about where you come from, but where you choose to build your life together." Preston's hand found Daisy's under the table, their fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had. In his touch, she felt the promise they had made to each other, not just on their wedding day, but every day since. To face whatever came together. And in a town that had once been just another stop on her desperate flight from the past, Daisy Fitzgerald Irwin had found not only sanctuary, but the greatest gift of all, a future filled with love, respect, and the freedom to be herself. The bad wife of Denver society had become the treasured heart of a family and a community that recognized her true worth, just as Preston had from the very beginning.